We had just finished number 12 at the end of the last video. We had negative 2/3, negative 14/3, and so I went and put those in solution brackets. And that, remember, is called the square root property when you have a squared quantity equal to a number, as we did on that problem. So I didn't see the video quit, and I went ahead and was working the next problem. So I had to write it on a separate sheet of paper since I already worked it out. So this is the next problem, page 10. So this is definitely not a square root property because the square root property can only have a squared quantity and a number. This also has an x term. So that means I have to go back to my list up here. If it's not square root property, first I check for factoring. Remember, factorings from chapter 4. And then if it doesn't factor, I usually do quadratic formula. So this is going to be a big blast from the past, guys. Because, okay, let me get this squared away on the camera. Okay. Because we have not done this method for a long time. So this is not a double bubble problem. We don't even know for sure if it factors yet, but it's not double bubble. This is what we called back in chapter 4, the AC method with grouping. So anytime the leading coefficient is not 1, remember how we had to multiply these? So we're looking for factors of 48 that subtract to 47. Well, look at that. Ding, 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 ding. First pair, those two subtract to 47. So this is going to be an AC problem. This is factoring from chapter 4. Let's say you're not good at factoring and this problem doesn't say what method to use on the test. We'll use quadratic formula if you're better at that. But I feel like we've been doing factoring since like day 1 almost, that everybody should be best at that. But, use whatever you feel comfortable with. So we learned in chapter 4 that this means the signs will be different. And this means the larger number gets that negative sign. So 1's going to be positive, 48's going to be negative. So we don't go straight to the bubbles. Remember, we can't do that if the leading coefficient's not 1. So we have to replace this with those two values. So that's going to turn into 6x squared. I like my negative first, so I'm going to do negative 48 and use this variable plus 1x and then minus 8. And remember, when you add these two, you should be able to get that back. There were so many sign errors on chapter 4. If the students had just stopped and added those, they would have seen they made a sign error. Negative 48x plus 1x, yep, that's negative 47x. So then the next step for AC method was grouping. So grouping is where we take the GCFs out. So here we have a 6 and an x common. So we take a 6x out of each term, and we're left with x minus, here the x's cancel, so 8. Then we learn to bring down that sign. And on the next two, what's common is just 1. And remember, we need that 1 because that's the second element in the parentheses. So when we divide both of these by 1, we get x minus 8. And this is when we do our happy dance. Remember, if these match, that tells us we're on the right track, and they do. So we pull that out as the third GCF. So here was the first GCF, here was the second GCF. This method requires GCF 3 times. So now we pull this binomial factor out as the next GCF, and then whatever's left goes in the second parentheses. And then we're back to the end of chapter 4 where we learned if A times B equals 0, zero factor property, then either A is 0 or B is 0. And we'll find our two solutions by solving those. So x equals 8. Subtract 1, 6x equals negative 1. So negative 1/6. So then my two solutions are -1/6 and 8. And I think there was room. Oh, no, I was thinking that was the last page, but it's not. So hopefully you found a second sheet of paper so you could finish that one on. Okay, so let's do the last problem finally. 7-2 was a long section. Okay, so 14 looks a lot like 13 did. I wonder if it's going to factor. So first we have to set it equal to 0 before we can test our factoring. So 3x squared plus 8x plus 1 equals 0. So because there's a number in front, again, we have to do AC. So that comes out to be 3. Are there factors of 3 that add to 8? No, there are not. So guess what? Factoring's out. Square root property's out. So plan C, quadratic formula. So now we have a fail-proof plan. If something doesn't factor, then we can use it. So this is A equals 3, B equals 8, C equals 1. And let's go ahead and write our quadratic formula. X equals opposite of B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So plugging that in, we're going to get opposite of B, which would be -8 plus or minus B squared. 8 times 8, oops, off the page a little bit. 8 times 8 is 64 minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is 1. All over 2A, which is 2 times 3. So then we get it ready for the calculator. Remember this from earlier in the section. So 64 minus 12, 52. I'll check it on my calculator too. I just needed to use my brain for a little bit. So 64 minus 4 times 3, times 1. And sure enough, it's 52. And then remember, if this can be broke down, we have to break it down. And guess what? 54 is 4 times 13. So that would be 2 2s and a 13. So I think I'm going to go back to that other page. I don't like scrunching it all up there. So this is number 14, page 10, 7.2 notes. The final problem, finally. So -8 plus or minus, and I didn't do a tree for 52, I just kind of did it in my head. So try to get this stuff on the paper. Okay, let me focus. Okay, so 52 is 4 and 13. But a 4 is 2 2s, so I'm going to write 2, 2, 13, and then all over 6. So now I'm going to put this other paper away so I can move this one up. So that's going to come out 2 2s will come out as a single 2. So that's going to be -8 plus or minus 2 rad 13 over 6. And then you have to ask yourself, is there a GCF? If there's a GCF, then you take it out and then you're finally ready to write your two solutions. And there is, right? 2's common to everything. And remember, it has to be common to all three. If this was a 1, you would never be able to simplify those. But because all three terms have a 2 in common, then that works. Okay, so that leaves us with x equals -4 plus or minus, now it's a 1, so I don't need to write it, radical 13 all over 3. So my two solutions are -4 plus rad 13 over 3 and -4 minus rad 13 over 3. And remember, all your answers on this test need to be written in solution sets because they're all going to have 2 solutions. Okay, so what you should be working on, this is for your Tuesday notes, you should have 7.1 in Connect done. So that was from the last notes. And you should be working on 7.2 in Connect after these videos. And now for the practice test, you can do numbers 1 through 8. So that should be your homework so you stay caught up, because this chapter we only have 1 day for every section, so you definitely want to keep caught up. And like I said, this is probably our most important section for Math 150. I mean, of course you need to know how to factor, so 4 was super important, but in 150 they're not going to teach you how to factor. If you don't know how to factor, you just fail. But this is part of their curriculum, so this will give you a huge step up doing well in Chapter 7. So you should have 7.1 and 7.2 done before tomorrow, and you should have 1 through 8 on your practice test done. Okay, see you in the next section. Bye.